only this time he had to repay it in 90 days. As time passed, Hershey's little business wasn't going as expected and was far away from repaying the money. As he began to question himself as to what he should do next, a British importer found Hershey's caramel and was really impressed by the unique taste it had. After learning about its month-long shelf life, he immediately placed a large order and promised to pay Hershey if the candy made it to London in good condition. The only problem was, Milton couldn't even afford to produce the caramels and ship them out in the first place. So, he walked down to his bank, and even though he had the pressure of a $700 loan, he asked the bank for an additional $1,000. Initially, the officer rejected him, but after taking a look at his tiny wagon maker, he was really impressed with how he was able to make such delicious caramels with such modest means. Knowing that the bank wouldn't loan him the money, the officer personally signed the loan for him. Immediately after, Hershey hired a few hands to help him complete the order and was able to ship his caramels out the following week. Milton heard nothing over the next few days and grew increasingly impatient. He knew that if he didn't hear back from the British importer, his business would fail once again. Just days before the loan was due, Hershey received a letter. Inside was a check for 500 British pounds, which would be about $65,000 in today's currency. Milton was overwhelmed. Finally, he was able to pay off all of his debts, and his worries were over. From there, sales of his proprietary caramels, Hershey's Crystal A, took off. While most of his sales came from Europe at the time, he slowly began to expand in the US, and by 1894, Milton's company had grown to several factories with thousands of workers and was bringing in over $1 million in sales. He became one of the richest and most well-respected men in Lancaster. With a strong team in place taking over production, Milton was now in his 30s with more time on his hands and eventually grew restless. On one occasion, he visited the Columbian Exposition in Chicago to check out some of the world's newest inventions. Unbeknownst to Milton, this trip would forever change his life. During his visit to the exposition, Hershey witnessed J.M. Lehman's demonstration of chocolate rolling machinery from Germany. At the time, chocolate was considered a luxury that most people couldn't afford, but Lehman's demonstration proved to everyone that chocolate could be mass-produced and therefore had the potential to be cheap. Sensing an opportunity, Hershey offered to buy Lehman's entire equipment setup, which Lehman gladly accepted. Immediately after returning to Lancaster, Hershey began experimenting with manufacturing sweet chocolate, baking chocolate, and other cocoa products, and soon incorporated the Hershey Chocolate Company as a subsidiary of his caramel business. Using his old formula of fresh milk as he did with his caramels, Milton did the same with his chocolate products, and people loved it. During the next few years, Hershey kept adding more and more varieties of sweets until he eventually had over 100 different products to offer. However, he later noticed that chocolate sales were slowly spreading across Europe and eating into his caramel business share. At that point, Hershey believed that caramel had peaked and was fast becoming a thing of the past. With that in mind, he was ready to make one of the riskiest business decisions of his life. He was going to sell his caramel business and devote his focus solely to chocolate. In 1900, he sold his business to another competitor for a sum of $1 million, and immediately after, he ordered the construction of a massive factory with high-tech machinery for his new company. As construction on his new factory began, Hershey instructed some of his most trusted employees to go and work for some of his competitors so that they might learn their methods. Most of these people had to travel out of the country since no other company in America at the time was successfully mass-producing milk chocolate. Only the Swiss were believed to have mastered the process, and they had managed to keep it a secret. While most of his employees returned with no success, Hershey had other problems to deal with. In the early 1900s, political corruption was on the rise in Lancaster, and Hershey made the difficult decision to move away from his business town. He bought over 1,200 acres of empty farmland in Derry Church and began developing a whole new town from the ground up for himself and his workers. But as the walls of his 6-acre factory began to rise by the end of 1903, Hershey and his men still didn't know how to mass-produce milk chocolate. All of their attempts up to that point had failed. Unbeknownst to Milton, the answer was right beside him the whole time, in Lancaster. Hershey hired a previous employee from his caramel business in Lancaster, Johnny Schmalbach, who on his very first attempt found a way to warm and condense the milk without burning it.